All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the ORCID Community Town Hall. I'm Kimberly Iniger, Events and Outreach Specialist at ORCID. Now, before we get started, I invite you to respond to the icebreaker poll and tell us about you and your organization. And I'd also like to bring your attention to some features available during the webinar to enhance your experience. The first is closed captioning and translated captions. These features allow you to enable audio captions and translate those captions into a few different languages. To enable, click on the Show Captions button in your Zoom toolbar. We also have a dedicated Q&A channel, and we invite you to submit your questions throughout the session. To do so, click on the Q&A button in the Zoom toolbar. You can also view questions other attendees have submitted, upvote questions you're interested in, and add comments. We have some helpful documentation available to assist you in accessing these features, which is available in the Resources tab in the Zoom toolbar. We also have in resources a speaker profile, and I invite you to view them to familiarize yourself with today's presenters. Finally, the session is being recorded, and the recording, along with session materials, will be shared after the session. Now, I'm delighted to introduce Chris Shillum, ORCID Executive Director. Chris?
Hi, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. I see a good number of you have joined us today, so thanks so much for taking the time. And I would encourage you, as Kimberly said, to enter any questions you might have as we go through our presentation into the Q&A box in Zoom. Hopefully we'll have plenty of time at the end for your questions, and it's always good to hear from you and be able to answer anything that might be burning in your mind. What we're going to do today, as is traditional for our member town halls, is to give a progress update about what we spent our time doing last year, and a little preview of some of the things that we're working on this year. And we'll organize the session around our now 5 strategic themes that we've been using for a couple of years now. But before we dive into that, I'll just give you a very brief overview and a couple of headlines. As you know, but it always helps to restate these things, we provide 3 main services at ORCID. The ORCID ID, which is the unique persistent identifier, which is free of charge to researchers or contributors or anybody else who might find it useful to have one. The ORCID record or profile connected to the ORCID ID that includes all kinds of scholarly relevant profile data, as many of you probably know, employment, education, funding, etc. And last but not least, a key part of the ORCID value are the APIs we provide, which enable the data that everybody contributes to their profiles to be reused, saving time and interconnected with the pretty broad web of other scholarly systems and applications. We're making pretty good progress in terms of adoption. We don't really talk about the number of ORCID IDs anymore because it's not really interesting if those IDs are not being actively used. So we now focus on our active researchers in any one year, which is steadily climbing, and as of now is about 8.2 million. And we have those users in every country in the world now. So every country on the ISO country list, that's 249, including some tiny island nations. We have users actively using their ORCID records in those countries, which is great. As you might know, we are supported by our member organizations. I'm sure many of you are from member organizations. Thank you very much for your membership. We are approaching 1,400 members, and we'll talk a little bit later about the new members that joined us last year. And excitingly, we now have 5,600 systems actively integrating with ORCID API. So again, that kind of role of ORCID as moving metadata about scholars and researchers around scholarly ecosystem, I think we can say that we're probably one of the most interconnected systems in the scholarly ecosystem today. Of course, it's very important to make sure that we are sustainable as an organization. We provide persistent identifiers. We can only persist if we are on a stable financial footing. So I'm glad to report that in 2023, we had our 5th consecutive year of making a modest surplus on our revenue. and that's our goal. And we'll talk a little bit later on about what we do with that surplus and what it's enabled us to set up, particularly this year. We saw good growth in revenue last year from new members, offset, of course, by growth in expenses, particularly with current rates of inflation. But we were able to maintain a pretty stable level of surplus between 2022 and 2023. So having given that brief overview, we'll dive into the strategic themes. As I mentioned, we are continuing to organize our work, plan our work, using the 4 strategic themes that we announced in our strategic plan back in 2021. So that's increasing value to members, increasing value to researchers, upholding trust and integrity, increasing global participation. And this year, we're going to talk a little bit about the 5th pillar, which we use for internal planning, but we want to talk a little bit about what we're doing, which is improving staff experience. We want to make sure that ORCID is a great place to work. We have a great team. We want to make sure we keep the team happy and productive. So we'll talk a little bit about the work we're doing there. So I'm going to dive straight into the next section, which is increasing value to researchers. Unfortunately, our product director, Tom de Moranville, is currently on vacation. So you have to, unfortunately, listen to me talk to these slides rather than, but hopefully I can cover everything and answer your questions if there are any. So one of the major things that we worked on last year was improving the accessibility of the registry. In previous years, we've been working on a technical upgrade, moving the registry to a more modern framework. And that really enabled us then to implement all the improvements we needed to make in order to address accessibility issues. We have been audited against web content accessibility guidelines twice now last year. And the first audit revealed 50 issues. With our work, we got those down to 21 less critical issues, I would say, by the second audit, and we continue to work on those. So most of the remaining issues are in areas of the system that we plan to address and touch over the next few months, few years, and we will fix those remaining accessibility issues as we go. In fact, we've just released some changes to our registration screens, which still had some problems on them, and we've reduced the number of active accessibility issues across the registry now down to 17. And also importantly, we've also been thinking about how we bake accessibility into our development processes going forward. So we've looked at test tooling, we've looked at how we define requirements in order to make sure that once we get ourselves into full compliance, we can stay there. Another thing we did last year was reorganize the professional activities section of ORCID records. We used to have 4 separate categories of activities that could be added to records for membership, service, invited positions, and distinctions. And we often heard that this was quite confusing for our users. So we grouped those together under a professional activities section. We took input from the community and specifically our Researcher Advisory Council to help design this feature. And we think it's been successful in making sure that this section is a little bit easier to understand and use. And we didn't change the API, by the way. This is really just a change in the way that these activities were presented in the user interface. And I think that the third thing that we did last year, or the major thing that we did, was reorganize our online support resources. Some of you might not be aware, but we have a pretty significant user support operation at ORCID. We address about 5,000 requests from tickets a month, about 60% in the year, with a very high satisfaction rate of 93%. And the team do a great job. But we realized that we hadn't actually reviewed the self-help documentation for quite some time, and we could do a much better job of directing users to the information they needed to solve problems for themselves. So we reorganized the help center, as we now call it, improved the navigation, rewrote a lot of articles, changed the flow in our support request forms. And we managed to reduce the number of support tickets coming to the team by about 50%, with no reduction in user satisfaction, which is great because it means as we expand, the number of users we need to support constantly goes up. And now the team both have more time to make sure they do keep up with that growth, but also continually improve our processes and our documentation. So now we'll move on to some of the things that we have planned for 2024. One of the things that we're really focused on this year is making sure we have more complete ORCID records, and particularly a priority for us is to encourage the inclusion of affiliation data in ORCID records. So this first item is actually one we've already implemented, and we're making it easier for users to add affiliation information to their records by actually suggesting it during the registration process. So if I go to this next slide, you'll see that on the right-hand side, there's a screenshot of a new step that we have implemented in the registration process. Previously, we had made some changes to encourage people to set up both a personal and an institutional email address when they register for ORCID. That helps with making sure they don't lose access to the record when they move institution. But now using that institutional email address and using the raw data, we're able to suggest their affiliation, which they are able to add automatically to their record when they create it. We're very happy with the impact of this change. You can see from the chart on the left-hand side, we've seen a huge increase from around 13% to around 80% of users adding affiliation data to their records when they're created. And over time, that will have, we think, a significant impact on the overall proportion of records in the ORCID registry with affiliation data. Our next step here, of course, is we'd like to make sure that that data is affiliated, is validated. And we know that many of our members have integrations with ORCID that can add validated affiliation data, but researchers don't always know about them. So one of the things that we'd like to do this year is build into the registry the ability to suggest to users the integrations at their home institutions that can add data for them and provide those links. We haven't worked out the details of how that will happen yet, but we think that'll be pretty instrumental in, again, making it easier for users to update their records. We also want to look later in the year at making it easy for researchers to reuse data in their records. We only have a couple of export options today in the user interface. There's a BibTeX option and also a kind of a print format plain text option. We know that those formats are not always the best for reusing data in other applications. So we're going to look at improving and enhancing our export capability. And then finally, we often get asked about the work type taxonomy in ORCID. We currently have a list of works which is based on the CASRI standard. However, CASRI no longer exists as an organization, and that standard is unmaintained. And we know there are lots of gaps in the lists of work today. So we're exploring a couple of options. We don't want to invent our own taxonomy, and we will be doing some broad community consultation before we make any changes. But we hope during the course of the year to extend our work type vocabulary. Last but not least, we run a user survey on the registry itself periodically. We aim to continue to maintain very high levels of user satisfaction. These are the results from the survey we ran this quarter. And you can see that our customer satisfaction score is very high, just under 90%. Our what's called our net promoter score, which is on the left, is a number that can range between -100 and +100, and essentially talks about whether a user would recommend ORCID to their colleagues. And 57 is pretty good score we're happy with, and on track with the scores we saw last time we ran this survey. So we'll continue to be happy that we're maintaining a good level of user satisfaction with our services. Okay, so time for me to stop talking. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Ivo Weinbergen, our Director of Engagement, to talk about how we're increasing value to members. Ivo, over to you.
Thank you, Chris. So increasing value to members, that's all about proactively helping our members adopt ORCID at their institutions, rather than simply enabling an API and expecting them to integrate their systems with our registry and equipping them with compelling messages about the value of adding data so that we encourage their institutional administration and their researchers to use ORCID and simply make it easier for them to integrate in the first place. But why is institutional adoption important? So this is a visual representation of how an ORCID record amasses trustworthiness over time via data asserted by validated sources, such as affiliations added by the researchers' research institutions, grant data added by their funding agencies, or works by the publishers. When our members add data and therefore trust markers to ORCID records, what is actually happening is our members are contributing valuable information that gets propagated throughout the entire research ecosystem each time that researcher interacts with another system that then collects their authenticated ORCID ID and pulls that data into its system. All of this data adds more trust markers that build over time, and later on in the presentation, we'll be talking about what we're doing to make it easier to see in ORCID records how these trust markers are visible. While the entire research community can derive value from this data, it is an exclusive member benefit to add trustworthy information about their users to those users' ORCID records, whether they are students or researchers, authors or co-authors, peer reviewers, grant awardees, or any other contributor to research. So not only do our members improve the trustworthiness of those records, but as you can see here as well in what we call the virtuous circle, they also actively contribute to the global community network of trusted data, helping to uphold research integrity across the international research community. And you did see a poll pop up there, a survey from Kimberly as well, so hopefully you can add that information. In 2023, we increased the size of this network of interconnected systems by 18%, aided by our efforts to make it easier to both participate and integrate systems with the ORCID registry. And we're seeing more integrations being added almost every day. As Chris mentioned before, we're closing in on 5,600 connected systems today. And of course, the more connected systems throughout the research landscape, the more the global research community can benefit from the digital exchange of research-related metadata. Service providers that have pre-built ORCID functionality in their products and services, they enable hundreds of ORCID members to gain value from their membership in the quickest and simplest way by providing a means to easily integrate ORCID into their local workflows and systems, and they provide a more consistent user experience for researchers when they encounter ORCID. So we launched last year the revamped Certified Service Provider program that defines specific best practices for different workflows, ensuring that members who use these systems always experience best practice ORCID integrations. Recently, having added discovery systems as a workflow, we now have 5 specific workflows that can be certified. And service providers who are certified also receive additional benefits as well. Actively engaging with our community helps us better understand and respond to the needs of our users. And in turn, we are able to provide more robust, compelling materials to encourage institutional adoption of ORCID. In 2023, we made progress in overhauling our consortium support materials, including updates to our website content, targeting new members in each of our stakeholder groups. We also launched a new outreach resource library to ease the distribution of multi-language content to our consortium partners, as well as allowing them to share and reuse materials that they have developed among themselves. This will be especially useful in supporting the broader use of non-English materials developed by some of our consortia leads. And earlier this year, we actually launched a new method of training our consortia leads and keeping them up to date with all our latest systems and processes. As so much scholarly work is dependent on funding, funders play an especially pivotal role. And in 2023, we continue to build relationships with funding institutions around the world through our funder interest group. We now have funders from 25 different countries plus the EU participating in our regular funder interest group meetings. We also co-chaired a working group on national PIT strategies with the Research Data Alliance. The funder interest group published their recommendations in 2023, which include guidelines for stakeholders across the research community. So feel free to check that out on our website, where we have all the output from the few years of funder interest group materials. Another key activity last year has been our continued engagement in the policymaking process among US federal funders following the publication of the so-called NSPM 33 Research Security Guidance and the Nelson Public Access Memo by the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. Widespread adoption of persistent identifiers, aka PIDs, like ORCID, is critical to the success of trustworthy research infrastructure, which promises to accelerate the pace of scientific discovery by facilitating information sharing, reducing inequities in research outputs, and enabling reproducibility. For this to become a reality, research infrastructure providers must work closely together to ensure our products and services work seamlessly. So in 2023, we collaborated with our fellow PIT infrastructure organizations, specifically Crossref, DataCite, and ROAR, in a series of Better Together webinars, as well as in-person events. And I've recently also co-authored the first iteration of a guide for funders to support fair workflows, a publication aimed at helping funders understand what they need to do to adopt best practice PIT-enabled workflows. As every year for 2024, we've also defined multiple priorities and goals that will help us continue to increase our value to our members, which are listed here. We're specifically focusing on driving proactive member value increase with initiatives that involve multiple sections of ORCID, such as product and comms. One of the key goals is to update our API tiering model to encourage more registered public API use, as well as provide better reliability and higher API rates to our members via the member API. Another focus area revolves around our community trust network and how validated ORCID record data enables the community trust network. And we will, of course, continue to work closely with other PIT providers and the scholarly infrastructure providers and aim to increase awareness in the community of these collaborative efforts. And with that, I'll hand over to Julie, who's our Director of Communications, to talk a bit more about how we're increasing global participation at ORCID.
Thank you, Ivo. So many of our members cite the fact that ORCID is globally adopted as one of the main drivers for their participation. And this makes a lot of sense to us. Universal uptake of ORCID allows our member organizations not only to understand their country's research performance in a global context, but it can also help them better understand their researchers' international collaborations. And we already have really substantial adoption across the globe. This year, we grew our direct membership with 145 new organizations, including our first in Lithuania and Serbia. So as Chris mentioned earlier in the presentation, we now have a total of 1,375 member organizations in 58 countries. We also added 2 new members to our roster of global consortia. The Mexican consortium formed with 11 members, and the new Czech consortium formed with an initial 18 members, but they quickly added 4 new members, and so they now have 22 members, and they are led by the Czech National Library of Technology. But we know that not all countries have the quantity of nonprofit research organizations to form or sustain an ORCID consortium over time, or a reliable consortium host that can maintain the level of engagement that a community of practice for ORCID adoption really requires. So in 2023, we launched a new program to welcome regional initiatives to form consortia. This, coupled with the discounts from our membership equity program, which, as you might remember, is part of our global participation program that we launched in late 2022, go a long way together toward enabling smaller countries, particularly those in the global south, to come together to form sustainable consortia. Our regional consortia program exists alongside our standard national model, so there are now two paths to consortia formation. Last August, we signed our first agreement to host a Latin American and Caribbean regional consortium, and this is led by our highly successful consortia lead from Colombia. And speaking of global participation program, we're proud to share that in 2023, less than 2 years since launching the Global Participation Fund, we awarded 9 projects under 2 different grants, the Community Development and Outreach Grant and the Technical Integration Grants. What's more, we recently finished our 3rd round of proposals and selected 6 more projects for a grand total of 15 projects funded so far. The GPF grants are awarded on a biannual basis in the amount of $5,000 to $20,000, and the projects have a duration of 12 months. If you missed the recent GPF Showcase webinar, I believe that Kimberly just dropped a link so you can check out the recording of that. There's a lot of great information, and we're really proud of the project's progress so far. Now, to further our global reach, in 2023, we added 3 new languages to the registry and informational sites, so bringing the total number of languages we offer now to 15. Now, this supports over 96% of our users. To put this into context, we're now able to offer 30,000 pieces of dynamically translated content, whereas just 4 years ago, we were only able to offer several dozen when we were relying on hand translation. In addition, we added automated translation to the ORCID Help Center for the first time. And if you've attended any of our webinars during the past year, like this one, you may have noticed that we support live translated captions into over 25 languages. And this makes it easier than ever for us to engage with a global audience. Our live translated captions work no matter what language the webinar is being spoken in. And so this year, we're going to be launching member webinars in Spanish, Portuguese, and French languages. So if you attend those, but don't speak those languages, you'll be able to translate those into the languages that you speak. We're also working with our consortia to expand our multilingual outreach resources, but we're also expanding language support in the ORCID record by letting researchers find their organizations in their own languages. One of the items that we've been thinking about for a while and have had on our roadmap is to map our goals and priorities to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals in order to place our initiatives, especially increasing global participation, in a broader context, and possibly could help us identify some new opportunities. The SDGs, as they're called, are one of the most internationally recognized sustainability frameworks. And unlike many preceding definitions of sustainability, the 17 SDGs you see here on this slide have become a widespread reference tool for a variety of stakeholders. So, for example, governments or NGOs or scientists alike. And this has been backed by a broad global consensus. Ultimately, the discussions that we're having now with the ORCID board and among staff will help inform our thinking around the next iteration of our strategic plan, which will be published in 2026. And with that, I'm going to pass this along to Will so he can talk about our efforts to uphold trust and integrity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julie. That was really great, and hello to everybody. So I'm very pleased to tell you that at the end of January this year, after 10 months of very careful preparation, we moved the hosting of the ORCID registry to Amazon Web Services. There are a whole range of benefits of that, which you can see on the slide here on the right-hand side. But we're already much more resilient to outages, data center failures. We have a more secure system, but we will continue to work this year on improving security and resilience using the tools and best practices that are now available to us in AWS. But not only that, we'll also become more efficient and productive as a team, and be able to spend more time implementing new functionality, delivering value, and less time managing servers with some of the managed services that AWS offers us. Moving on to some of the new functionality that we've developed in this strategic theme. As you'll all probably know, we've always shown the source of data on the ORCID record, but we've made an important visual change to make it clearer when there are validated items on the record. So when member organizations have added information to the record, you now see a nice green tick, and that will help you, users and members, to reason about the contents of the ORCID record and make decisions about it depending on your own use cases. And similarly, last year, 2023, we piloted the use of record summaries, where we're summarizing those trust markers throughout the record. We discovered that they were useful. We piloted them with several publishers in their editorial workflows. For anyone who cares about research integrity and fake research, this is proving to be a very useful tool. In 2024, we'll take the next steps. We're going to add the record summary to the public record page, and we're also going to make the summarized data available in the member API. Last year, we also made a number of privacy improvements, including around our cookie consent process, which we've improved a lot and is now up to date with best practices around EU privacy law, and gives users the choices they need to accept or reject different types of cookies, and not just users in the EU. This is available for anybody anywhere in the world to choose their preferences. We also improved processes around data subject access requests for GDPR. For example, when you ask your data to be deleted. And we also improved our security practices around handling of users' ID documents, which we ask for in a last resort when users are trying to recover access to their account. And we're now making sure that we handle those as we should do, because of the security sensitive nature of them. And we hired our first ever dedicated data privacy officer, Ellen Patterson, who is already doing some great work for us. And at this point, I will hand over to Tommy Tepper, who is ORCID's Director of Finance and Operations, and he'll take you through some of the financial updates and so on.
Thank you, Will, and greetings all. On the finance side, the organization has been quite stable for a number of years. And after 5 years of sustained surpluses, we were in a position to consider reserves. So in 2023, the ORCID board approved an investment policy statement, which establishes a long-term reserve, which is to be used for 4 specific purposes listed here on the slide. And I'll let you read those, but the goal of upholding trust and integrity is affirmed in this action by making sure that ORCID is here for the long term to weather any storms that might come along financially through these reserves. and be resilient and be able to continue with mission regardless. And the last, we'll continue to work on privacy, as well as add a new initiative building on work that's already been done around cybersecurity. We'll be rewriting the privacy policy that's available on our site to improve the clarity and transparency, which is now the rule. It's been quite a while since we've done this, and ours can be rewritten in a better way. The new DPO will be spearheading that, Ellen Patterson. She'll also review privacy practices and increase our internal awareness at ORCID around the latest thoughts and methods in privacy. And then the last, as mentioned, cybersecurity. Will and team have done a lot around cybersecurity to make sure that we are able to maintain our data in a secure way, but we're going to conduct an external review of our internal arrangements and also adopt a framework that'll give us a plan of action for years to come. So very excited about that process as well. And now I hand it over to Steph, our Director of Staff and Board Engagement.
Great, thanks, Tommy. And again, welcome everyone. As Chris mentioned at the top of this presentation, in 2023, we formally added a fifth pillar to our strategic planning around staff experience. We have a great team and they're motivated by our mission and serving the community, and we want to make sure that ORCID continues to be a great place to work. And so some 2023 highlights that we're happy to share include implementing our family and compassionate leave policy. This includes parental leave as well as leave to care for loved ones. And we also better aligned our benefits across the multiple countries our staff are based in to include a universal vacation policy. In addition to improving equity across our staff benefits, we continue to track our internal and external DEI efforts, which you can see on our public Trello board. The senior team meets quarterly to track progress on this board and keep ourselves accountable. You can follow along, and Kimberly just dropped a link in the chat. We also spent time last year soliciting staff feedback, both at our in-person retreat. You can see all of us in Seattle in this picture right here on the slide, as well as anonymous surveys like our culture survey. And this staff feedback really informs our plans in 2024. And we have big plans in 2024 we're really excited about. Some highlights to include here. We are relaunching our professional development program to provide staff with more opportunities for development and growth. And as a remote organization, we will continue to be intentional about how we work. We're piloting a few different initiatives to improve our collaboration this year. We have also just launched or shared our updated whistleblower policy, which you can find on our website. The board approved this last month at our first board meeting, and this is meant to strengthen our organizational ethics and compliance. So we invite you to visit our website. You'll be able to read the updated policy as well as learn about our confidential reporting line. Next, I'll just provide a few quick updates around governance. In 2023, the board conducted an intensive review of ORCID's governing documents. It streamlined the ORCID bylaws, the board charter, and committee charters. And this exercise really just removed duplication across multiple documents and helped make the documents a little bit easier to navigate, made them more user-friendly, and make sure they were modernized and really reflected current organizational practices. This year, we're happy to welcome 5 new board members to the board. We're really pleased that they are such a regionally diverse group, and that helps reflect our global membership. We had our kickoff meeting last month, as I mentioned, and in addition to our board meeting, we held an intensive orientation session for our new board members. And this year we will be launching our nomination cycle for 2025 in May. So if you are interested in serving in the board in the future, please keep an eye out for that in our blog posts. Also happy to welcome back Lisa, who will be serving her second year as board chair, and pleased to welcome Greg Gordon, who's serving his first term as ORCID treasurer. With that, thank you again. We'll share the link with the annual report. You can learn much more about everything we covered here, and we'll turn it over to Kimberly for our Q&A session.
Thanks, Stephanie, and thanks to the ORCID senior team for this great presentation this morning. Like Stephanie said, I have just shared the link to the annual report in the chat, and it's also under resources. So please download it, take a look, and read more about all of our progress in 2023. We've got plenty of time for Q&A today, and we've got quite a few questions in the Q&A chat box. So if you haven't submitted your question, I invite you to do that now, or take a look at the questions already in there and upvote the ones that you're most interested in. To start, I will ask the senior team a question that came through registration. And we've talked a little bit about it, but maybe more specifically, our audience just wants to know, what can or is ORCID doing about paper mills?
Sure, thanks, Kimberly. And maybe I'll try and tackle that one. We mentioned earlier in the presentation the work we've been doing with highlighting the trust markers in ORCID data, those activities that have been added to researchers' records by our organizational members. And we think that that data has potential to be part of the solution to paper mills, is in both helping researchers and reviewers and editors understand the trustworthiness of the authors that they're looking at, but also having that data available for integration into all kinds of tools that many people are building that are trying to kind of detect some of those ethical problems. One of the things we're trying to ensure that ORCID data is used as a positive signal that a researcher can be trusted, not as a negative signal that they can't. There are other sources of data for us, but as a researcher-centric system, that's not something we want to support directly. And I'll also add that we are signatories to something called the United to Act consensus statement, which is a coalition that's been formed by COPE, the Committee on Publication Ethics, and STM, the Association of Scientific, Technical, and Medical Publishers. And United to Act is a coalition of organizations that is committed to addressing this problem. And we have signed up to that along with a number of other research institutions and publishers.
Great, thanks, Chris. Will, I think you'll be able to help out with this next one as it relates to our server migration. Are there any ethical conflicts with ORCID, a nonprofit organization, teaming up with Amazon?
I don't think so. And there are many possible aspects to this, but I suspect here we're probably talking about labor practices. And the big tech companies are under a great deal of scrutiny in this regard, and rightly so, I would say. In my opinion, in the case of Amazon, the questionable labor practices are in the e-commerce part of their business, which I see as effectively separate from the hosting, AWS hosting side of things. So in that regard, I don't see there being a conflict. Also, it's quite difficult to predict when issues will come up. One of the alternatives of AWS was Google and their cloud platform, but they've also recently been in the news in the last few days with similar issues. So I think it's difficult to avoid, and in my opinion, the issues are in a separate part of Amazon's business.
maybe if I can just add to that, Will, I agree with what you
Yeah.
said. One of the things that was encouraging for us about AWS is of the three major cloud vendors, which are Amazon, Google, and Microsoft. Amazon is the furthest forward in terms of use of renewable energy. And in fact, the particular data center that we are using, we believe is running on 100% renewable energy, which is certainly a huge improvement over the data center we were in, which was from a legacy provider that we understand had no such commitment. So yeah, as Will said, there are multiple aspects to this. And I think in some regards, we've made a step forward with AWS.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Chris. And I'd also mention in favor of Amazon that they are very good to us as a not-for-profit company. They have a dedicated not-for-profit team, and they help us out a lot, and we get a lot of extra free consultancy and help as a not-for-profit that we wouldn't do as a commercial organization. So that's another plus point in their favor.
Great. Well, thanks, Will and Chris, for all that context. Our next question is about some different export possibilities with specific services. So is there an export to Zotero being worked on or discussed? And then someone else chimed in saying that CSL JSON export would be fantastic for us. So any updates on either of those?
Sure. Let me tackle that one as Tom's not here this time. We haven't designed this feature yet, so the team works in an agile mode. It's on their roadmap, and they'll be starting to look at this in more depth, I think, in Q3. There are many possible export formats we could support. So I think one of the things we want to explore is the possibility of organizations, members building export wizards, just as they can build search and link or import wizards today, which would give the ability for anybody who cared about a particular format to plug an export capability in. I think it would be hard for us to support every possible export format or system that would be useful. Having said that, yeah, export to Zotero, I think, is definitely a high priority. And if there's anybody from the Zotero team on the call, we'd love to discuss with you, and as we start to think about how this feature will work, maybe even partner with you on that one.
Great, thanks, Chris. Our next two questions are about work types. There's a lot of excitement around the work going to be around work types coming up for us. So the first one is exciting news around greater support for work types. We get a lot of questions about art/humanities work types, which have a single option in other at the moment. Will those be a part of the expansion?
Yeah, I think that's another product question, which again, sorry, means me answering for now. Absolutely, yeah. I think arts and humanities are one of the big gaps in the work type taxonomy today. So whatever we settle on, and there are a couple of options we're exploring, the aim would be to have much better coverage of output types in arts and humanities in the new taxonomy.
And then in relation to that, there's another comment saying that it would be nice to also have a collaboration with LinkedIn so that ORCID IDs can be added to those profiles easily, especially for humanities researchers and students who are just learning the value of an online presence. Any thoughts on that?
Sure, I'll comment on that one. I fully agree. That's my comment. But it's actually harder than you think to get that done. We've been trying to to talk about that with LinkedIn and or Microsoft, but so far I've not been able to get anywhere. So any additional communications from the community on that would be appreciated as well. It always helps if there's a multi-angle approach to that. But yeah, it would be great to have that.
Maybe Eva fully agree. It might be worth mentioning that not LinkedIn, but another service that has been a very high priority for a very long time, to have integrated with ORCID is GitHub. And actually last week, we announced the first step of the partnership with GitHub. They have now implemented on their end the ability to link a GitHub profile with an ORCID ID using the authenticated workflow, which is fantastic. We are shortly to announce more details of that partnership, but we hope to see more integration features in coming months. So we're making some progress. LinkedIn is one that I think is going to be tough to get done, because I'm not sure how much they specifically care about research and education.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Evo, and thanks, Chris, especially for sharing that exciting news that we have coming up with GitHub. This next question is about grant funding, and it's about a two-parter in sorts. So how is NIH grant funding, along with NSF funded grants, integrated into ORCID to bring that data to ORCID?
Yeah, I'll take that one. NIH has been a long-standing member of ORCID, and we're looking forward to welcoming NSF soon, hopefully. In terms of integrations with ORCID and use of data, so right now, ORCID record data flows into ScienceCV and then BioSketch. Those connections are there. And then NSF is also recommending the use of ORCID IDs in the common form. We would, of course, much like NIH and NSF to write grant data, but right now they are not yet doing so. But we are, continuously talking to them and trying to get there. Of course, as I said previously with LinkedIn as well, like any additional requests coming from the community will also assist in that effort. But yeah, we hope we'll get there, but right now it's not happening.
Thanks, Evo. Our next question is, do you know if it's likely that the Scopus automatic update to ORCID that is used to maybe for work will be reinstated?
Yeah. So it was a bit confusing because there is, I think you're referring to the search and link wizard, because there's no auto update with Scopus, but the search and link wizard is working. To our knowledge. If it is not, then please indeed let us know and confirm that, and then we'll look into that. But the search and link wizard is active. As far as an auto update, that hasn't happened in the past, and maybe it will in the future.
Yeah, maybe also to add to that, clearly that's something we'd love to see happen. We are in regular contact with the Scopus team, like many of our integrators, and encouraging them. And referring back to what we talked about earlier on, we now have relaunched our CSP program, Certified Service Provider program. We've just announced a set of criteria for discovery tools like Scopus, which includes automatic sync. So if Scopus want to become a certified service provider at any point, that would encourage them to build that feature.
Great, thanks, Chris and Evo. Our next question.
Sorry, Kimberly, I just see a new comment about Scopus search and link routinely failing at step 6. Thank you for that. We'll take that back with our support team and investigate.
All right, thank you for that additional note. Our next question is specifically about the peer review section. And first of all, they say that the peer review section of ORCID is a very nice feature. Have we had much opt-in from publishers to populate records with peer review activity?
I can maybe take that one. Yeah, we've had very good uptake from all the major publishers, which have enabled this. All of the major scholarly submission systems support it. I think the last publisher to start adopting, the last major publisher to start adopting was Elsevier, and I believe in 2022 they made the decision to start rolling out peer review edition. What we do see sometimes is that publishers leave it to individual editors to make the decision about whether to enable this integration. So that's maybe why it's spotty in some cases. And one of the things that we are hoping to work on with publishers this year is providing information they can use to educate their editors on the benefits of ORCID integration, so that they can be encouraged to enable the integration functionality.
Great. Our next question is specifically about trust markers. So it's been noticed that early adopters have added a lot of works manually to their records, and then later they enable the update by cross-ref or make a link with the repository of the university, but then the green trust marker is hidden. This can be changed manually per work, but is there a way to change this for a group of works in one go?
Sure, let me take that one as well. That's actually a really good question, and actually I asked the product team earlier on exactly the same question. There isn't a way to do that today. I think that's something that we should look into as to whether it's possible to automatically kind of prioritize the trusted assertions when they're grouped together. So hopefully more to come on that one.
Great. We do have time for probably one or two more questions. And one that I see here is just a quick question about, is there any progress on creating an integration with bpress Digital Commons?
Not at the moment, as far as I know.
Yeah, so just to clarify, it's up to each service provider to create the integration, not us. We could never do that for all of the 5,000 systems we have integrated. We know there's a lot of demand about that. We have shared that information with our colleagues at Elsevier and reminded of them. They haven't shared with us any specific plans for getting that done that we can share back with you. But it's certainly something we continue to keep on the agenda when we have discussions with Elsevier.
Yeah, and again, coming back to that point of a push from the community always helps in that respect, right? If it's only us talking to the vendors about becoming certified, but there's no real demand coming from the community, then it's always a more difficult conversation for us to have. So it's always great if the community talks about that as well.
And I would add, one of the things we would really encourage people to do, again, now that we've relaunched the Certified Service Provider program, is specifically require that any systems you purchase have ORCID Certified Service Provider status in your RFPs. And in my experience, that will be the biggest single way to influence the people that you're buying services from to get those integrations both built and up to best practice standards.
Very helpful. Potentially our last question. This one, I think what it's asking is, I think they want to know, well, I'll read the full question. We have a ROAR for our global alliance and are interested in tracking our research outputs. We are currently focused on providing guidance to our members for associating their affiliation in ORCID. My question is about downstream integration slash service, and if employment or professional activity categories are treated as the same.
I'm not entirely sure I understand that question. It's a bit detailed, but affiliations are a general category of activities on an ORCID record, and employment and the various kinds of professional services I talked about earlier are kinds of affiliations. An affiliation being an association between a record holder and an organization. So they are distinct, both in the registry and also in the downstream data in the API and in the public data file. So hopefully that answers your question.
And if further clarification is needed, please feel free to send us an email at meetings@orcid.org and we can help answer that question more fully. But I do think that's all the time we have today for our session. So I just want to thank the ORCID senior team and all of our attendees for joining. And as a reminder, please download the annual report. It's available in resources, and there's also a link to it in the chat. Chris, anything you'd like to say before we sign off?
Well, just thank you so much for your time. Hopefully this was useful and informative. As Kimberly said earlier, lots more detail in the annual report. So we encourage you to download that and take a read. And as always, any questions, reach out to us and we will do our best to answer. Thanks for your time, everybody.
Thank you,
everybody.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.